back to Witchin' and Winin'. I'm Miranda, your resident witch.
And I'm Christal, your resident wino.
And before we jump into tonight's episode, we actually want to give a really special shout out to somebody.
Yes! We got our very first listener email recently, which honestly made our entire week. So shout out to Casey. Thank you so much for
thank you.
reaching out to us and for the support and the suggestions. And we really appreciate it more than you probably know.
And one of the things Casey mentioned was wanting us to talk more about heaven and hell, which honestly sent us down a huge rabbit hole.
Oh, yes, because once we started researching the hell, we realized one topic kept coming up over and over again. Near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
People clinically dying, flatlining, being declared dead, and then coming back and describing what they experienced. And the stories are all over the place. Some people describe overwhelming love and peace, and some describe terrifying darkness. Some claim they met God, angels, deceased family members, or beings made of light. And others describe experiences that sound straight out of a horror movie.
Yeah, and what's wild is that these stories aren't just coming from a deeply religious people. Some come from atheists, from doctors, from scientists. And, regardless of what people believe caused these experiences, a lot of people who go through them come back completely changed afterward.
Tonight we're going to talk about the science, the theories, disturbing experiences, peaceful experiences, and several really detailed first-hand accounts from people who say they crossed the line between life and death and came back.
So, dim your lights, grab your wine or your coffee or whatever keeps your soul attached to your body.
And let's talk about near-death experiences.
Now, again, before I start my first story, I wanted to talk about something honestly doesn't get discussed nearly as much when people talk about near-death experiences. Most people have heard the comforting stories, right? The bright lights, the overwhelming peace, the feeling of unconditional love, seeing deceased relatives, and being told it's not your time. But according to an article published in Missouri Medicine titled Distressing Near-Death Experiences, The Basics by Nancy Evans Bush and Bruce Grayson, not all near-death experiences are positive. Some are deeply disturbing. The article explains that while pleasant NDEs have been widely publicized for decades, frightening or traumatic experiences are often hidden because people are afraid to talk about them. Many experiencers reportedly withdraw and avoid discussing what happened or struggle for years trying to understand it. According to the researchers, distressing NDEs generally fall into three major categories. 1, inverse experiences. 2, void experiences. And finally, overtly hellish experiences.
The first category is called an inverse NDE. That's when a person experiences things commonly reported in positive NDEs, like leaving the body or moving toward a light. But instead of feeling peace, they feel fear, panic, or terror. One man who was thrown from a horse described floating above the scene, watching emergency workers try to save him. But instead of calmness, he panicked and screamed, "No, this isn't right. Put me back." Another woman described separating from her body during childbirth and flying through space toward an intense white light. But instead of comfort, absolute terror as the light rushed toward her like a collision. There was also a woman who collapsed from hypothermia and experienced her entire life replaying before her eyes. Except instead of love or understanding, she felt overwhelming sadness and depression.
Yeah. So the second category is what researchers call the void. These experiences involved vast emptiness, isolation, darkness, or annihilation. One woman described leaving her body during childbirth and suddenly Sorry, my cat. One woman described leaving her body during childbirth, again, and suddenly finding herself in deep, empty space. She encountered circular beings who told her that her life had never been real. According to them, Earth, her memories, her existence, all of it had been an illusion. I mean, imagine waking up with that idea in your brain. I mean, it's frightening.
Matrix.
Another one.
It's like being in the Matrix.
Gosh, yeah. I'll be like, hey, if it is all an illusion, put me back and like maybe change my code a little bit. Make me a little bit richer, a little bit skinnier. Anyway. Another woman said she became a tiny point of light floating alone in endless space. She described screaming endlessly in silence while realizing that this unbearable isolation might last forever. A suicide attempt survivor described being dragged into a dark abyss or void. She said she expected oblivion and nothingness after death, but instead she found herself being pulled somewhere she did not want to go. Another experiencer described floating in complete blackness with no sense of up, down, left, or right. He said it felt eternal and that all he could do was think and reflect inside the darkness.
Then there are the overtly hellish experiences. The article says these may actually be the rarest type of distressing NDE, but they are often the most horrifying. One man experiencing heart failure described falling deep into the earth until he reached massive rusty gates that he believed were the gates of hell.
Rusty gates.
A woman described wandering through a desolate landscape filled with suffering spirits who appeared lost and tormented. Another experiencer reported being attacked and torn apart by malevolent beings. One woman described horrific gray creatures with gelatinous appendages clawing at her while guttural moaning echoed around her. She said the smell and sounds remained vivid in her mind more than 40 years later. Another woman described descending into a dark cave-like place filled with crying, screaming, wailing beings that appeared grotesque and tortured.
One of the most interesting things discussed in the article is how people react afterwards. Researchers say there are generally three major responses. The first is what they call the turnaround. Some people interpret the experience as a warning and completely change their lives afterwards. Many become deeply religious or spiritually transformed because they believe they were given another chance. The second is reductionism. That's when experiencers try to explain away what happened scientifically or psychologically, like oxygen deprivation, brain chemistry, hallucinations, that sort of thing. Sometimes as a way to emotionally protect themselves from what they experienced. And the third response is what researchers call the long haul. These are people who remain haunted by the experience for years or even decades afterwards. Some said the memories never faded. Some never told their spouses. Some described flashbacks that continued years later. Others struggled with terrifying questions like, why did this happen to me? What are the rules? Will I go back there when I die?
One thing the researchers strongly emphasize is that there is no evidence that good people automatically have pleasant experiences, while bad people have terrifying ones. In fact, the article notes that saints have reported deeply disturbing NDEs, while criminals and suicide attempt survivors have sometimes reported blissful ones. The researchers also explain that a person's beliefs, culture, religion, and mental framework can shape the imagery or symbolism they experience. And regardless of whether someone interprets these experiences spiritually, psychologically, neurologically, or some combination of all three, one thing shows up again and again. People come back changed. So how do near-death experiences intersect with religion? A really interesting perspective we came across while researching this episode came from an article published on the Christian Scholars website titled Near-Death Experiences and the Emerging Implications for Christian Theology. The article explores something a lot of people wrestle with after hearing these stories. How do near-death experiences fit into religion, especially Christianity? According to the article, many NDE accounts appear to strongly support major Christian ideas. Things like consciousness surviving physical death, the existence of a spiritual realm, encounters with loving beings, reports of heaven-like environments, and even experiences involving Jesus, which I would argue matches the majority of religions. Not necessarily Jesus, but, higher beings.
Yeah.
But the article also points out that near-death experiences sometimes challenge traditional Christian theology in unexpected ways. For example, researchers have documented NDEs from people all over the world, including atheists, agnostics, Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and people with no religious background at all. And despite cultural differences, many experiencers report remarkably similar themes: leaving the body, encountering light, feeling overwhelming peace, meeting spiritual beings, life reviews.
One major point discussed in the article is that near-death experiences often seem to transform people spiritually, but not always in the way organized religion expects. Many experiencers become less afraid of death, and then more compassionate, less materialistic, and more focused on love, forgiveness, and relationships. But at the same time, many also become less dogmatic afterward. According to the article, some experiencers come back believing God's love is far bigger and more inclusive than they previously imagined. Others begin questioning ideas about eternal damnation, exclusivity of salvation, or strict denominational beliefs because of the unconditional acceptance they reported feeling during their experience. The article also discusses how many NDE reports involve what experiencers interpret as Jesus, even among people who were not Christian beforehand. But interpretations can vary heavily depending on a person's culture, their beliefs, and expectations. Some describe angels, others describe deceased relatives, some encounter beings made of light, others simply describe an overwhelming intelligence or loving presence beyond language.
And the angels thing is interesting to me because traditionally, how people imagine angels to be is nothing at all like what they're described as in the Bible. Like in the Bible, angels are freaking terrifying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're like the nightmares of them, they're scary. But so when people say they've seen angels, that just makes me question things. But anyways, this article also addresses skepticism directly. It discusses arguments that NDEs are caused by oxygen deprivation, hallucinations, medications, dying brain activity, or psychological stress. But according to the author, researchers continue struggling to explain certain elements of near-death experiences through purely material explanations alone, especially cases involving detailed out-of-body observations that were later reportedly verified. The article points to decades of research from physicians, psychiatrists, cardiologists, and neuroscientists who argue that the phenomenon deserves serious study rather than dismissal. And one of the biggest themes repeated throughout the article is, even when experiencers interpret what happened differently, most of them come back convinced consciousness continues after death.
The article ultimately argues that near-death experiences may represent one of the strongest modern arguments for the possibility that human consciousness exists beyond the physical brain. But it also admits that these experiences raise difficult theological questions that religion does not always neatly answer. Questions like, why do people from different religions report similar experiences? Or why do some people encounter hellish realms while others experience peace? Can personal beliefs shape what someone experiences? And what exactly are people encountering during these moments? The article doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it does suggest something important, that near-death experiences may force both skeptics and believers alike to rethink what they assume about death, consciousness, spirituality, and what, if anything, waits beyond this life. All right, now we're on to the stories. The first story. This first experience comes from the Reddit page NDE, posted by Reddit user Finite Sausage Fingers, and fingers with a Z.
Sorry.
Anyway, it goes
fingers, but there's a finite number of them.
Yeah. I'm going to read it as written, okay? As the creator, as the writer. I had an NDE about 17 years ago and have only shared the full thing with a few people. I want to write it down properly somewhere. I used to have a strange, cold-triggered allergic reaction which, on this occasion, ended in anaphylaxis. I didn't understand it well at the time. I was cycling up a hill in South London with 48 cans of beer in my backpack, heading to watch a rugby match with friends. Got to the top, stopped to take a breather, thinking I was just unfit. That's when my heart stopped. I fell backwards, but I didn't go with my body. I stayed at roughly head height, floating, watching everything below me. I watched a young woman come out of an estate agent's office. She was on the phone to the ambulance. She knelt down and took my pulse, told them on the phone there was no pulse. She put me in the recovery position. She took the keys off my belt loop, used them to chain up my bike so it wouldn't get stolen. This was London, and put the keys back. She stayed with me until the ambulance arrived, until I was stretchered away and defibrillated. I watched all of it from outside my body. While I was watching what was happening on the street, I was also somewhere else at the same time. The best way I can describe it, imagine the physical universe is above a piece of paper laid flat, and a drawing pin is pushed up through it from underneath. The pinhead sitting just above the paper got pulled down into basically nothingness, pulled out of the physical into a kind of nothingness below it. Up and down don't make sense to the sensation, but it's the only way to describe it. Still aware of above, but in this other space simultaneously. I wasn't alone there. I couldn't see them in any normal sense, but I was aware of other things present, and there was a flood of communication. Telepathic, not in words, in concepts. It's hard to describe because I'm trying to put something not of this place into a language of this place. What was communicated was calming, gentle, not urgent. The concepts that came through were things like, your body might be dying. That's okay. If it does die, you'll get a different adventure to start. If it doesn't die, you'll be just fine. Everything is okay. There was no fear there. The beings around me weren't trying to convince me of anything or pull me anywhere. They were just present, and they were kind, and they wanted me to know I was safe whichever way it went. And I survived. When I was discharged, I walked back to where it happened to collect my bike, which was still there, chained up exactly as she'd left it. I bought a box of chocolates and went into the estate agent's office to thank the woman who'd helped me. She freaked out when I walked in. She kept on saying, "How could you know? How could you know?" Because I knew details I shouldn't have known. My eyes were closed and I had no pulse the entire time she was there helping me. The chaining of the bike, the keys, who she was or where she came from to save my life. Things I had no way of knowing if I'd been unconscious on the pavement the whole time. I knew because I'd watched her do it. What it left me with. I don't push this experience on anyone. I rarely talk about it, but it changed what I think is possible, and it took fear of death off the table for me in a way I couldn't have arrived at any other way. The beings in that space were patient and loving and not in a hurry. Wherever they were, it felt like home in a way. I don't have a tidy theological framework that fully accounts for it. I grew up Christian, but I've never thought what happened to me maps cleanly onto a single tradition's version of the afterlife. It was bigger and stranger and more peaceful than any of the descriptions I'd been given before it happened. I mean, dude, that one to me is obviously we're starting off nice. We're starting off with the good experiences and the peaceful ones, and that's what we all want, you know. And what, in my opinion, one of the main parts of religion is to make us feel comfortable about life and about death, especially death, you know, because like you don't know what's going to happen, and to be able to have that experience is nice.
I wonder if that's why people see, you know, whenever they go to a good, warm, peaceful place, they see different things, things that are familiar to them, like family members, or even, you know, the way they imagine an angel from, wondering if it can ease them in the transition. They're shocked by the death experience and the transition to where they're going or what's going to happen.
Maybe.
Okay. So this next experience comes from a YouTube interview with a man named Gerard. How would you say that? Shug?
Yeah.
Sure. Gerard Shug, who shared a near-death experience that completely changed his life. Unlike many NDE accounts where people describe peace, warmth, or bright light, this one went somewhere much darker. Before the experience itself ever happened, tragedy had already hollowed his life out from the inside. In 2013, Mr. Shug's daughter, Tanya, died from a pulmonary embolism caused by thrombosis complications. He explained that she had been prescribed regular injections, but shortly before her death, she had shown him the bruises covering her stomach from the needles. After she passed, unused syringes were found sitting on her living room table. The loss devastated him. He said that after her death, he shut himself away completely. The blinds in his apartment stayed closed, and darkness filled the rooms. He barely left except to buy chocolate, beer, and other comfort foods. Within months, his weight climbed to 150 kilos as depression consumed him. At the same time, his health was rapidly collapsing around him. He suffered from severe COPD, which is a breathing disorder, Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and worsening physical disabilities. His tremors were so violent that simply holding a cup of coffee could cause it to spill everywhere. Eventually, he tried to regain some control over his life. He cut sugar from his diet and began slowly losing weight, but emotionally, the grief never left him. Then in 2020, after years of loneliness and longing for his daughter, something inside him finally broke. He later explained that this was not a cry for help. He truly wanted to die. As a pharmaceutical chemistry lab technician, he understood medications well. One evening, alone in his apartment, he gathered months' worth of medicine and swallowed everything he could hold in both hands. Then he washed the pills down with several bottles of beer. The last thing he remembered was sitting on his sofa. Then everything disappeared. So when he finally woke up days later in intensive care, his other daughter was sitting nearby. Doctors had reportedly warned her that he probably would not survive the overdose, and that even if he did, severe brain damage was likely. But what haunted him most was not waking up in the hospital. It was where he believed he had been while unconscious. Mr. Shug said, unlike traditional near-death experiences involving light or heavenly peace, his experience was exactly the opposite. According to him, he went to hell. He described standing before an enormous stone palace with massive gray walls and sweeping roofs that reminded him of ancient Chinese or Japanese architecture. A long jetty stretched out over dark water. lined with old wooden boats moored on either side. Souls arrived in these boats. One by one, they were brought toward a throne carved from stone, and sitting upon that throne was what he believed to be the devil. He described the figure exactly how many people would imagine him, with red skin, horns, a terrifying presence, watching silently as souls approached. But the worst part waited below. Near the base of the palace stood 4 massive stone structures shaped like a lion or tiger claws. They rotated constantly, producing an unbearable grinding and creaking sound that echoed through the entire place. He then realized what they controlled. Some of the souls were selected. Those souls were forced into a massive funnel-like mechanism and ground apart. Mr. Shug said the terror of the place was indescribable, not symbolic, not dreamlike, but completely real. He explained that he stood beside the devil watching it happen, watching these souls get ground up like meat and feeling fully present inside that scene. Though he feared the horror unfolding around him, he strangely did not feel that he himself would be thrown into the machine. He simply watched, helpless. He later reflected that his Catholic upbringing may have influenced the imagery he saw, but regardless of interpretation, he remained absolutely convinced the experience was real. The memory never faded. He said that unlike dreams, which disappear moments after waking, every detail of his experience stayed burned into his mind for years afterward. The stone throne, the boats, the jetty, the grinding claws, the screaming machinery, the funnel. According to hospital records, he remained unconscious in intensive care for roughly 5 or 6 days. To him, the experience lasted the entire time. When he finally recovered, the experience fundamentally changed him. Before the overdose, he had desperately wanted to reunite with his deceased daughter through death. Afterward, he no longer believed suicide would lead him to her. Instead, he came away with one overwhelming conviction. God gave me life. I do not have the right to take it away. From that moment on, he said he accepted that death would come only when God decided it was time. And despite his illness continuing to worsen, his perspective transformed completely. He described becoming more optimistic, more accepting, and more spiritual. He began believing strongly in guardian angels, signs, reincarnation, and the idea that souls return until they complete what they were meant to learn. Even during later medical crises, including a severe fall where he lay bleeding on the floor, unable to breathe, he said that surrendering control and accepting whatever happened brought him peace instead of panic. Near the end of the interview, he explained that although his body continues failing him, he no longer sees his life as meaningless. His children still need him. His grandchildren still need him. And for the first time in years, he no longer sees his glass half empty. Now he says it is always half full.
That's a good ending, even though it had all the scary,
It is, but as far as him, believing that he went to hell because of suicide, I don't know about that, what I think about that, because there are a lot of NDEs. There are a lot of people that have had NDEs through suicide that have had good experiences in the afterlife that they see, But I don't know. I'm not the one that makes the decisions here, so I don't have the answers.
Yeah. Next one. We're calling this one The Highway. This next experience was shared on Quora by a user named Scott Thompson, who claimed that during his near-death experience, he spoke directly with God. And according to him, the conversation completely changed the way he understood fate, free will, suffering, heaven, and even war itself. Yeah, I saw and spoke to God during my NDE. I would describe God as padded steel. He, or she, was very gentle, very kind, very friendly, but also rather inflexible when it came to changing what was called the plan. And so Scott explained that during this experience, God showed him a metaphor meant to explain the relationship between fate and free will. According to him, God described existence as a massive highway stretching endlessly towards the horizon. The road twisted and curved so far into the distance that nobody walking it could truly see where it ended. But God could. Because, as Scott described it, quote, "He built the highway." On this highway, human beings are allowed to move freely. They can walk toward the left or the right edges. They can drift away from the center. They can make choices. They have free will. But no matter what, they must remain somewhere on the highway. Scott said God explained that the center of the highway represented the path of least resistance, the place where peace, harmony, purpose, and enlightenment existed. According to him, God said this was the path people were originally meant to walk. The further someone drifted from the center, the harder life became. Scott described God explaining it almost humorously, saying that when people move too close to the edge of the road, God starts, quote, "kicking them in the pants," unquote, to guide them back towards the middle. And according to the experience, this is why people often feel blocked from certain desires or goals in life. Sometimes the things people want most simply are not part of the plan. Scott said the experience emphasized that the central path was not selfish. It was a shared road, a road built on sacrifice, compassion, compromise, and helping others walk more peacefully through life. According to him, God explained that self-sacrifice is rewarded not because suffering itself is good, but because sacrifice helps people move back towards peace and harmony with others. He then described religion and churches as structures originally meant to help guide people towards the center path, though he admitted human beings often fail at doing that properly. According to Scott, God also explained that tragedy changes the road itself. Losses, grief, suffering, and devastation create off-ramps that send people onto entirely different paths they never would have traveled otherwise. The death of a loved one, trauma, war, catastrophe, all of that.
That makes me think of like different dimensions, how they, is it dimensions, different, where they say you create another timeline.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That you make. So that's, it makes me think of like you're making a choice and it off-ramps you to a different timeline.
Yeah.
A new path.
All of it reshapes the highway. At one point during the experience, Scott said God challenged him with a thought experiment designed to explain fate more deeply. What if someone simply refused to participate in life anymore? What if they stayed in bed forever and refused to move? Scott described imagining himself lying in bed while spiritually another version of himself continued walking the highway towards its edge. On the first day, physical discomfort became unbearable. On the second day, hunger and thirst became overwhelming. By the third day, he realized something unsettling. Either God had created him strong enough to permanently resist life, meaning dying there had always been his fate, or God had created him weak enough that eventually he would get up, drink water, and continue walking the road exactly as intended. Either way, the highway itself never changed. According to Scott, this realization led to one of the central messages of the experience. Human beings are free to make choices, but they are still moving within a structure larger than themselves. He described humanity as countless people walking interconnected roads, constantly influencing one another's lives through every action they take. Some people walk only a short distance before reaching the end of their road. Others continue much longer. But every death, tragedy, kindness, betrayal, sacrifice, or act of violence creates ripples that redirect other people onto entirely different highways. Scott then described what he believed God explained about war. According to him, war was not evidence of God causing suffering. It was evidence of human free will. People choose whether to create peace or pain. People choose whether to help others walk through life or drag them towards destruction. And according to the experience, those choices matter. Scott claimed God explained the negative actions, especially deliberately harming others, move people further away from harmony and peace. But forgiveness, redemption, and genuine change could still alter a person's direction. Toward the end of the account, Scott described heaven itself. He said heaven was not simply a place. Instead, it was a shared reality built from peaceful thought, harmony, compassion, and collective consciousness. According to him, people whose actions and intentions fundamentally opposed that harmony could not remain there because their presence would distort it. And despite everything else he described, Scott said heaven was magnificent beyond words. Finally, he returned to the metaphor of the highway one last time. He said every person walking through life is influencing countless others around them, often without realizing it. Some create suffering, some create peace, some destroy, some heal, but through all of it, God watches humanity walking the road, observing, learning, and waiting to see what people choose to do with the freedom they were given. Yeah, I'd say so. I like the metaphor. I think it's definitely easier for people to conceptualize with the metaphor,
Like the purpose of life, what is the big main goal we're working toward?
And I like the whole, recently I experienced something that was how he says that so you influence people and oftentimes you don't know the impact you have on others or something to that effect, right? So when I went to the Renaissance fair recently, I ran into an old high school friend. And she came up to me and, it's been dude, I graduated 2010, okay? It's been years. And obviously she was very excited. We were excited to see each other. And then later on when we were talking, she was telling me that I had such a huge impact on her life. And I think in high school, we were only together for a year in high school. She said that she felt that she needed to meet me at the time that she did in order to become the person she is today. And that, she always thought of me as a mother figure, helping, happy, peppy, adding life into her life, I guess. And then she said that with how everything I helped her, that she was able to be that person for somebody else. Be the person I was for her to somebody else. And I had no idea that I had such a big impact on her. And it was quite I don't know, it was very humbling, and it really does, it supports that, you're influencing people in ways that you don't even know.
Well, the opposite of that. I was told by someone in high school that I annoyed the hell out of them because I was too happy and cheerful.
Well, fuck them. They could be miserable and sad.
That is very sad. I mean, they told me that while I knew them in high school, so
hopefully they've
grown. Someday they looked back on it and saw it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess some people just cannot stand being around optimistic, happy people. But I don't understand it. But I'm not in their shoes, so. Okay, so the next experience was shared on Quora by a user named Lissy Tribble. This story feels less like a traditional near-death experience and more like stepping sideways into something completely beyond language. Lissy said she was 15 years old when she traveled to the Philippines through a government exchange program designed to immerse students into another culture by having them live with local families. Coming from what she described as an overprotected childhood in the American South, the experience felt magical to her. She suddenly had 5 new siblings, a completely different culture and different language, an entirely different world, and she loved it. But shortly after arriving in the countryside of Luzon, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but she developed severe stomach pain. Neither she nor the family she was staying with realized her appendix had burst. By the time she was finally taken to a small local hospital for emergency surgery, the delay had caused peritonitis, a life-threatening infection. Then, during the operation, everything changed. As surgeons opened her abdomen, she heard one of them say in English, "We can't save her." But according to Lissy, she was already no longer inside her body. She described floating near the ceiling in the top corner of the operating room, calmly observing the surgeon's work frantically below her. And strangely, she no longer felt emotionally connected to the body on the table. She said she could sense the doctor's panic and desperation clearly. At one point, she even floated near one surgeon's ear and attempted to comfort him, only to realize he could neither hear nor see her. I think that's super sweet. Then she heard them pronounce her dead. After that, she drifted out of the operating room, and she described floating through the hospital hallways, hearing nurses speaking, radios playing, fans whirring, and noticing details with impossible clarity. Her eyesight, which had been poor in life, suddenly felt perfectly sharp. Eventually, she reached an exit door and described fill in the actual physical textures and densities of its layers as she passed through it. Then something pulled her away. She described being sucked into what she called a living vortex, a twisting tube filled with kaleidoscope walls and moving silhouettes that darted around like reflections in water. Some of the figures giggled like children playing. Then suddenly, she was no longer alone. Lissy said she found herself gathered into the presence of a massive being with long black hair and flowing white clothing. The figure radiated overwhelming love, humor, acceptance, intelligence, and peace. And yet, it also felt ancient and powerful and almost frighteningly majestic. She struggled to even describe it. At one point, she wondered if it might somehow be her grandfather, though she immediately recognized how impossible that sounded. The being, according to her, did not resemble any image of Jesus she had ever seen growing up in Catholic school. Well, I'm going to jump in here and just say that's probably because most of the images of Jesus we have here in America are white. And
Yeah.
well, Jesus was not a white man.
No, definitely not.
Instead, she described it as something completely different from earthly categories altogether. She called it paradoxical, soft, nurturing, loving, yet somehow immense and absolute. When Lissy was describing herself while there, she said she was almost jelly-like and completely pliant, while the being seemed to remove fears from her simply through its attention and presence. Around them swirled constantly shifting geometric forms, landscapes, colors, and collapsing vistas of impossible beauty. And according to Lissy, the being communicated answers to questions she had never even needed to ask. Then the experience shifted again. And that's where I'm like, whoa, back up. What questions did you ask? And what were the answers? Anyways, the being informed her that she had something she needed to do. She suddenly found herself in what she described as a kind of workshop or backstage studio area, almost like something from an Ingmar Bergman film. I don't even know if that's how you say that. There she was apparently tasked with helping create or design some kind of object. She admitted she could barely remember what the object was, only that it seemed connected somehow to healing and time itself. She vaguely remembered it being shaped somewhat like a dodecahedron. Lab-coated technicians observed her work calmly while an overwhelming sense of joy, trust, and motion filled the environment. And somehow, while working there, she said she could see across enormous distances and even perceive forward and backward through time. Then, almost instantly, the experience ended. She was told she probably would not remember most of it, and just as quickly as she had left her body, she returned. Zap! Suddenly she was back beside her body. The surgeons still had their hands inside her abdomen, desperately trying to save her. Then she opened her eyes. The doctors reportedly jumped in shock. One was nearly in tears. The other apologized repeatedly, explaining that they believed she had died during surgery and that the equipment used had not been properly sterilized. According to him, she had likely contracted a blood disease from the operation. But Lissy said none of that upset her. She felt overwhelming gratitude simply to be alive. Even the intense pain no longer seemed important. Over the following weeks in the hospital, she described developing what felt like an unusual intuitive connection to her own healing process. She refused morphine because she believed it interrupted the strange inner guidance she was experiencing. Despite being severely injured and recovering from peritonitis, she began walking by the third day. And throughout her recovery, she said fragments of that impossible experience lingered with her. The sensation of existing outside time, the feeling that reality itself had dissolved into something larger, the overwhelming love of the being she encountered. But one of the strangest parts happened afterward. Every night while she recovered, an elderly Filipina woman, estimated to be nearly 100 years old, would quietly come kneel beside her hospital bed for hours at a time. The woman rarely spoke. She simply stared at her with the exact same love Lissy had experienced during the near-death experience itself. Eventually, the nurses explained that the elderly woman was named Lola Tala, a long-term patient who had insisted on visiting her first American. The nurses offered to stop her from coming, but Lissy refused because somehow the woman's presence felt familiar, comforting, connected to wherever she had just been. Years later, Lissy said her scar eventually faded to a pale crescent shape, and the blood disease she contracted was eventually cured through later medical advances. But she never forgot what happened, and for years she told nobody. Because how could she possibly explain something that felt completely beyond words? She described it as feeling marked by what she called a lunatic blessing.
I like that, a lunatic blessing. I mean, honestly, the hospital got off easy if she wasn't gonna, go crazy in the law system for that. Because, come on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what the rules are in those countries.
Oh, true. Good point.
But,
good point.
The woman that she said somehow made her feel more connected to where she had just been, that woman was so old and a long-term patient, so she was probably already had like one foot in the grave, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that when you're that close to death, you are more connected
Yeah.
to the other side, you know?
Dude, I saw it with my grandma when she was really close, you know, like the last couple of weeks. Like she became very connected and she was seeing things and talking to what she called like the man over her shoulder that wouldn't stop talking.
What?
Like sometimes we would just be chatting with my grandma and then she'd turn around and look behind her and be like, "Will you shut up?" Talking to the guy who wouldn't stop talking to her.
And
we were just thinking like it was an angel of death, but like not in a bad way, you know? Just like some, you know,
or family member that had passed.
Maybe, but somebody to help her in the transition or whatever.
Yeah.
Like she was not scared of him. She was just annoyed.
She never had like any issues with hallucination or hearing.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Mm-mm.
So that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Did she ever say, give him a name?
She just said the man that won't shut up.
That was his name. What he was saying?
Well, no, she did not.
I would have so many questions.
Yeah.
Like,
for my,
if you can hear me, visit her dreams tonight and answer all my questions about. Shut up. I would like to know.
Okay, I'll clue you in if you know if I hear anything.
Okay, she's visited you in your dreams before, so.
Yeah, several times actually, but yeah. Okay, so here's the next story. This next account also comes from Quora, submitted by Richard Martini, author of several books about what he calls the flip side, or the afterlife. But unlike the earlier stories tonight, this account doesn't focus on one single near-death experience. Instead, Richard discussed years of interviewing experiencers, filming between live hypnosis sessions, and analyzing what people claim to encounter after death. And according to him, one of the strangest patterns is that almost nobody describes hell the same way. Richard explained that although he has encountered people who believe they experienced hellish realms during NDEs or hypnosis sessions, their descriptions were wildly different from one another. One example he referenced was Dr. Rajiv Party, a physician whose near-death experience completely transformed his life. During that experience, Dr. Party reportedly encountered what he initially interpreted as a hell-like place populated by beings with horns. But Richard said he later questioned him about that imagery. Why did horns automatically mean evil? After all, horns themselves are simply physical features, not morality. According to Richard, Dr. Party admitted that it was more the emotional feeling of dread and fear attached to the imagery than the imagery itself. Richard then described two between-life hypnosis cases where he personally filmed where people initially encountered terrifying environments immediately after death. One woman, who believed she had died in ancient Egypt near the era of pyramids, described entering a sulfur-smelling realm filled with fear and darkness. But during the hypnosis session, the therapist asked her a simple question: why are we here?
So that lady, it sounds to me like she is having a past life regression session. And she's thinking about where she was between her lives, kind of like what we talked about, I think, in the last episode, how some of them were describing things like heaven and hell and places like that they went to between their lives.
Yeah. According to Richard, the moment she examined the place consciously, the entire environment dissolved. Suddenly, she realized she was free to leave. And immediately afterward, she found herself returning, quote, back home, the same loving destination most NDEs experiencers eventually describe. Richard said this pattern repeated itself often. Whenever people closely examined frightening entities or places from their experiences, the fear itself seemed to unravel. He described one woman who vividly remembered seeing a horrifying gargoyle with glowing red eyes staring at her during an experience. So he asked her to mentally, quote, freeze the frame and examine the creature carefully. Then he asked a simple question. What exactly is evil about red eyes? People naturally have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, black eyes. Why should red automatically represent evil? According to Richard, as the woman looked closer, she realized there was nothing inherently terrifying about the creature itself. The fear had come from the unknown. He explained that over time he noticed something else. Memories from near-death experiences often became clearer when people were calmly questioned about them, even outside hypnosis. And in many cases, experiences that initially felt horrifying eventually transformed once examined more deeply. Richard argued that because no two held experiences ever truly match one another, it raises a philosophical question. If every description is different, what exactly is hell? Then he shared one of the strangest cases reported by hypnotherapist Michael Newton in the book Destiny of Souls. According to Richard, Newton once conducted a between-life regression session with a Christian minister who wanted to see whether hypnosis was legitimate. During the session, the minister suddenly panicked and claimed Satan himself was approaching. Newton calmly asked him to describe what he saw. The minister said the figure had horns, glowing eyes, and fire coming from its mouth. Newton asked a surprisingly ordinary question. What's on his feet? The minister paused, then answered, tennis shoes. At that moment, according to Richard, the terrifying figure removed its demonic appearance and revealed itself to actually be the minister's own spirit guide playing a prank on him. The guide reportedly told him, quote, your whole life, you frightened people with stories about Satan and fear. You used fear to control people. I wanted you to feel what you've made others feel. End quote.
Booyakasha.
Right? Richard said that across thousands of between-life hypnosis cases, the consistent message reported by subjects is that there is no literal eternal hell waiting for them after death. Instead, many experiencers describe fear-based realms as temporary constructs or projections shaped by personal expectations, cultural conditioning, or guilt, trauma, or belief systems carried over from life. According to him, once people recognize they have a choice, the fear dissolves. And what often follows instead are reports of overwhelming peace, unconditional love, acceptance, and return to what experiencers call home. Richard argued that true evil appears far more often in human behavior on Earth than in anything people report after death. You know, like wars, cruelty, violence, manipulation, all the hatred. Those, he suggested, are the closest thing humanity has to hell. But beyond death, many experiencers claim that people leave behind the identities, fears, and roles they played here. Richard compared it to actors stepping off a stage. The costumes come off, the props are set down, and whatever remains returns backstage.
I've always thought that if there is a hell, it very well might be where we are right now.
Honestly, God.
Because of those exact reasons. Like, this is such a cruel, disturbing, disgusting behavior type of place full of all of these horrific things that just make my stomach turn and make me sick. And I just feel like this is the worst place you could possibly be. All of the good in this world, most people out there, whether they even realize they do it or not, are just tearing it down. All the beauty and all the love, and they tear people down. They make people feel horrible. They fight. There's violence and the manipulation and the hatred, like religion. That's why I I don't like religion because they're so full of hate for everything and everybody that does not fit their mold or their standard. Even, these standards that are not even said in the Bible. The Bible talks about, beating your wife or your slave and how that's okay. And everyone's like, well, that's the Old Testament. Okay, so you think it's okay to just like worship somebody that's like, oh, I'm just going to change my mind about that and I'll make a New Testament and let's change the rules. But then you're unwilling to forgive somebody for their actions and what they did wrong in the past when they're willing to change.
Yeah, dude, that's amen.
Amen. Says the witch.
Yeah.
Okay. So this next account comes from a YouTube interview on Randy Kay's Heaven series, where a woman named Jen McCoyaski, sure, okay, shared a near-death experience following a suicide attempt when she was 20 years old. What makes her story especially unusual is that she described experiencing both a terrifying hellish realm and what she believed was heaven itself. Jen explained that depression had haunted her for years. And to those of you that think like people that commit suicide it's the most selfish act that you could possibly do because you're hurting all these people. Okay, well, they are in such like chemically and physically, emotionally messed up place in their minds that they physically cannot comprehend those things because they are in such despair. It's a despair that if you haven't been there, you cannot ever comprehend it. So for anyone to say that suicide is selfish, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not about you. It's about the person going through it. And I can guarantee they're not doing it just to hurt other people. It's out of desperation. Anyways, so Jen explained that depression had haunted her for years. Her first suicide attempt happened when she was 17 after growing up in what she described as a deeply dysfunctional home filled with verbal abuse, emotional pain, and brokenness. When she was 11 years old, her father died unexpectedly in his sleep at only 39 years old. According to Jen, that loss shattered her family and left a massive hole inside her. By the age of 20, she found herself trapped in another unhealthy relationship, one she described as toxic and emotionally destructive. Then one day, during a vicious argument over the phone, her boyfriend told her, "You should kill yourself." And in that moment, something inside her broke. She remembered thinking about her father, how he had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. And she decided that was how she wanted to die too. Jen said she walked to a nearby Walgreens, bought sleeping pills, returned home to her apartment, and began swallowing every medication she could find. She had previously been treated for depression and anxiety, so she already had numerous prescription medications available. Before taking them, she stopped in front of the mirror. Although she had no personal relationship with Christianity at the time, she said she still knew about God, Jesus, and the idea of hell from American culture. Growing up in a Buddhist Laotian household, Laotian?
I think maybe it's Laotian.
Laotian?
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Okay. Growing up in a Buddhist Laotian household, Christianity had always felt foreign and distant to her. But standing in front of a mirror, she remembered hearing that suicide condemned people to hell. And according to her, she said aloud, "God, I heard that if I end my life, I will go to hell. But I'm in so much pain. and I would rather go there than experience this.
Oh,
That is desperation. Oh, the immense amount of pain. Like, if you're an empathetic person at all, an empath of sorts, you've got to feel her pain at least somewhat, and it hurts. Then she swallowed the pills. As the overdose intensified, Jen described losing the ability to think clearly. Her body stopped functioning properly. Her legs gave out completely. She became terrified. Realizing she was dying, she called her therapist and admitted what she had done. She reportedly told him she did not want help. She only wanted someone on the phone while she passed away. But the therapist refused. He threatened to send an ambulance unless she immediately found someone to take her to the hospital. Embarrassed by the thought of paramedics arriving at her apartment, Jen forced herself to crawl toward her roommate's room because she could no longer walk. Her speech had become slurred and incoherent. Once her roommate realized what happened, she rushed her to the hospital, and during that drive, everything changed. Jen said she began seeing what looked like a cage descending over her from above and below, like she was being trapped. At the same time, she heard what she described as demonic voices chanting in another dimension. Low, mumbling, hostile. She also described being drawn toward what she felt like a black sphere. An overwhelming certainty flooded her mind. She believed she was dying and going to hell. Terrified, she began silently repenting in her mind. She cried out internally, "God, I don't want to go there." By the time she arrived at the hospital, she was drifting in and out of consciousness. Medical staff carried her inside. Her stomach was pumped, then she blacked out completely. The next thing she remembered was waking up the following day while doctors explained that the amount of medication she consumed should have stopped her heart. According to them, she should have died, but the experience itself was not over. After being discharged from the hospital and returning home exhausted, Jen said something happened while she lay in bed recovering. She described suddenly feeling her spirit pulled downward through her mattress. Then she began descending rapidly through the earth itself. As she fell, she claimed she could see layers of the earth passing around her. The mantle, the underground strata, exactly like something from a geography textbook. Then suddenly, she landed in what she described as absolute darkness. Not ordinary darkness, something deeper. A darkness beyond anything she had ever experienced on Earth. She said she could not physically see anything around her, yet somehow she knew she was surrounded by beings she identified as demonic. And according to her, they communicated telepathically. Voices began attacking her from every direction. "You're right, God doesn't love you. You're right, God doesn't exist. You're right, God doesn't care about you." Jen realized these were the exact thoughts she had carried during her life while depressed and suicidal. It felt as though the beings were throwing her own despair back at her, but something inside her resisted. Telepathically, she began fighting back. "No, God does love me. No, God is real. No, God cares." She later explained that she somehow knew she could not agree with the darkness surrounding her, because if she did, she feared she would remain trapped there. Suddenly, the darkness split open above her. A massive, radiant light burst through. Jen said she saw a white horse and a glowing being descending toward her. She never claimed with certainty whether it was Jesus or an angel, But in that moment, she said she was rescued. Immediately, she began ascending upward with incredible speed, reversing the same path she had traveled downward. First above her apartment, then above the earth itself, then higher into space. As she rose, she saw what appeared to be countless angels surrounding an enormous radiant light ahead of her. She said she heard singing. She described it as the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, something no earthly language could properly describe. For the first time in years, she felt completely at home. She said every feeling of depression, emptiness, and emotional agony vanished instantly. All that remained was warmth, peace, love, and overwhelming belonging. And despite believing she was unworthy of such a place, she was unbelievably happy to be there. And then another realization hit her. Her family, her mother, her siblings. She imagined the grief they would feel if she truly died. And the moment she thought about them, she heard what she believed was the voice of God say, "This is not your time." Immediately, she began descending again. And just as suddenly as the experience began, she woke up back inside her body. Years later, Jen said the experience completely transformed her life. She eventually became a Christian, entered ministry work, married, had children, and dedicated herself to helping people struggling with depression, trauma, and suicidal thoughts. But she also remained deeply impacted by what she believed she encountered in both realms. According to Jen, the darkness she experienced felt accusatory, isolating, and hopeless. But the presence she encountered in the light felt overwhelmingly loving. And despite everything she had done, she believed that love still reached for her.
I love that. That's so sweet. Like that. And I mean, obviously, again, the way to get there is scary, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay, so one, I think we need to break this up into 2 parts because we're already almost at an hour and a half.
For real?
And we're about halfway done.
For real?
For real. Yeah. So guys, this is all we have time for tonight, but we will have more next time. So think of this as your part 1, and then next time you'll get your part 2 of heaven and hell, the near-death experiences.
Yes. Casey, you got part all for you.
Yes. 2 parts out of your 1 suggestion. So guys, please email us your suggestions, your inputs, your thoughts, because if you do, we will use them. And that email, by the way, as we say every time, is witchenandwinin@gmail.com. That is
WITCHNANDWINN@gmail.com.
Remember to like, share, comment, follow, do all the things because that obviously helps us.
Yes, the more you do that, the more we get moved up into the search engine so people can find us.
And we're just a couple of moms trying to share our interests with everyone else.
Yeah, we're not professional.
As always, thank you for hanging out with us tonight and stay spooky, friends.
If I had a near-death experience and floated above my body, I'd probably wave at myself. And your body would still be drooling on the pillow. What if heaven has a playground with no bedtime? That's how you know it's heaven.